Good morning. Thanks so much for inviting me up. I've spent a lot of time in the last couple years up in Northwest Ohio dealing with the issues related to Western Lake Erie Basin. Chris contacted me about a month ago to see if I could come up and talk about what we're doing as it relates to the wheat producers. Many of you know about the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, of which we have an opportunity in that program to incentivize producers moving towards planting small grains or wheat and adding that into rotation. We see that as a multi-benefit from a conservation standpoint, and I'll touch on many of those points here shortly. But in the meantime, I'm going to touch on a few other programs that we have out there that would be of interest to you. We've got the Conservation Security Program, of which in the Western Lake Erie Basin, it was one of the premier watersheds 15 years ago. We spent a lot of money up in this area to incentivize and reward producers that are doing a good conservation job, along with adding some additional practices. That program's continued to change over the years. It's more about what you're going to do instead of what you've done now. And probably the biggest change was a move from a 10-year program to a 5-year program, which allows for a lot lower commitment on your standpoint. Back in the 90s or late 90s, when it first came out, we were looking for long-term security. Tying things up for 10 years didn't seem like a bad idea. As we've moved through that program, getting commitment from landowners and producers for 10 years, we recognized as a challenge and reduced the number of years of commitment as related to that. So if you're already well on the way of adopting conservation programs and are looking to add a few marquee pieces or further advance it, CSP program is a program that you may be interested in. And in that program, we also promote, adding small grains or wheat to the rotation. The other program that we've got out there that we see a lot of use in the Western Lake Erie Basin and even across the state is our continuous CRP program that we run in conjunction with the Farm Service Agency. And in the Western Lake Erie Basin, we've got the program called the CREP program, which provides an additional bonus payment for practices such as waterways, buffer strips, buffering around surface inlets and elimination of surface inlets, working wetlands, things like that. These are practices that are designed to reduce erosion and improve water quality. If I had my way, we'd see all our streams buffered up here. And the advantage of the stream buffers is it allows us to straighten some edges out and provide some benefits for you guys as far as efficiency, as far as farming. However, a lot of you would recognize the fact that over the years, as we've cleaned out the ditches, a lot of the spoils got thrown right on the edge. So the unfortunate thing with that is we don't have continuous sheet flow over the ditch bank down into the ditch. A lot of times we'll have the ditch banks higher than the field level. The water will run along the edge and then go in concentrated form. The disadvantage to that is a lot of that surface water enters into the ditch without being treated or running through that grass buffer to settle the sediment and nutrients out. So if in those fields where you've got the case where the spoil's been thrown along the ditch, along with seeding down the ditch bank, if we could do a few bump outs there to improve the filtration of the sediment and the water before it enters the ditch, that's definitely going to be an advantage from a water quality standpoint. There's working wetlands is somewhat suited for the state. We've had a lot of wetlands converted up here into very productive farmland. The working wetlands was originally developed out in Iowa. Their topography and land use is a little bit different than ours. But there are some cases out there where a working wetland would fit. Basically, the idea is we want to treat as much water before it enters into the water or waterways as much as possible. So that's another program. We've got the Wetland Reserve Program. Generally, that's where we're going to put larger tracts of land into permanent easement to restore the wetlands. That program may or may not fit you, but if we can also get those strategically located where we're treating surface water coming off or where streams are coming out of bank, it provides a nice change to the ecosystem and also allows us to do continuous treatment of water once it reaches the waterways. But the main program I'm here to talk about today is the Environmental Quality Incentive Program. And I'll say in the Western Lake Erie Basin, if you're located or produce a crop in the Western Lake Erie Basin, your opportunity to receive a contract under the EQIP program is greater than any place in the state. The Western Lake Erie Basin is our hot ticket. You guys have all seen the news on the algae blooms and the impact that it's having on recreation and the industries up there. My job as a state resource conservationist is to assist our field and also provide information to Terry Cosby, our state conservationist, on how best to deal with reducing nutrients in the Western Lake Erie Basin. And when we talk about the EQIP program and adding wheat to the rotation, there's a lot of benefits to that. You know, most of those you guys all know. It's reducing the pest cycle, your ability to combat resistant weeds with a different herbicide program. And one of the other big key factors that's been up here has been compaction. And we believe if we can reduce the amount of compaction, we're going to get better infiltration rates. And I also believe the best time to deal with compaction is after the harvest of a small grain crop. You know, if we're trying to deep rip soils late in the fall, our moisture level is usually too high. We're probably actually causing deeper compaction and causing more problem than we are good. The other benefit or other tool that we've got after small grain is the implementation or seeding of cover crops. A lot of you have heard of oilseed radishes. I think it's something that's going to go a long ways to improve soil quality. But the other thing I will say, I used an analogy the other day, is we've got to understand what's causing the compaction. And it's like if you've had a farm truck for years and your son turns 16 and you give him that pickup truck to drive, and you know you drove it for 10 years and never had a transmission problem. And in the next 6 months, your son goes through 6 transmissions. You know, do you keep fixing the transmission, or you try to figure out what's going wrong? Is it just because the truck got old, or are they hooking up in the parking lot on Friday night and your son and the neighbor's sons both having transmission problems? So until we figure out what's causing the compaction problem out there, we can put a lot of Band-Aids on it, deep ripping, oilseed radishes, but we need to look at what we're doing to cause that compaction. I'm a big proponent of controlled traffic. Most of you have got guidance systems in your combines, in your planters, in your spray rigs. It's going to take some time to get our wheel traffic stabilized, but in these soils up here, the sooner we get rid of compaction, the sooner we get rid of a lot of problems. You know, along with that, you know, I want to increase the infiltration and also the absorbency. And if you look at the corn bean, if you're in a corn bean cycle, most likely, especially with tillage, most likely over the last 20 years, your organic matter has dropped on your soil test. One of the main ways to build organic matter is to add small grain to your rotation and then add cover crops and reduce your tillage. And for every percent of organic matter we raise, we're going to see about an additional inch of rain holding capacity in your soils. Most of your soils have a lot lower organic matter today than they did when they were first being farmed. So we've seen 3 to 5% increase in organic matter on long-term cover crop no-till soils. And that will increase your water holding capacity and hopefully help the lake. The other opportunity that we have when we add small grain to the rotation is the ability to install conservation practices. Most of you over the last several years after the wheat came off, it either got double cropped to beans or it got tile installed on it. And I understand in this neck of the woods, tile is definitely needed for the production of corn, beans, and wheat. However, when we're installing those systems, I'd like for you to take a look at what other practices that you could install to further reduce the amount of nitrogen and phosphorus that's leaving your farm. Those are drainage water control structures for the main part. What we're trying to do is hold back water as much as we can to either sub-irrigate your crop and or reduce the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen leaving the field during the non-planting and non-harvest season. Most of your contractors are well aware of those practices. We've provided incentive through the Environmental Quality Incentive Program to do them, as the state has also run several programs to incentivize that. So we all recognize the need for drainage. We just need to fine tune it a little bit and advance it to the newest technology that's out there. And I guess the other most vital important opportunity we've got to deal with when we put small grain in rotation is nutrient management. All of you have heard about the 4 R's. Chris Henney and OAB is a partner with the 4R Stewardship Program, where we're certifying dealers across the state, but mainly focusing in the Western Lake Erie Basin, to ensure that we're getting the fertilizer on at the right time, in the right form, at the right rate, and at the right place. And if you look at where fertilizer is the most vulnerable, it's most vulnerable when it's on the surface. Anytime we could subsurface place those nutrients, we're going to reduce the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen that's leaving the farm. There's a lot of new technology out there. It goes along with the controlled traffic and also managing the nutrients, where we can get those nutrients applied either at a 1-year rate or a 2-year rate after wheat subsurfacely, and we can come back in and plant right on top of those strips with our corn, and our beans should be able to get those nutrients. So as dealers and retailers, I strongly encourage you to seek out Chris and see about getting signed up for the 4R Stewardship Program and getting your dealer certified. It's an opportunity for you to tell the public and your producers that you care about nutrient management and care about agriculture's effect in the Western Lake Erie Basin. The other thing that NRCS has done, we've spent a lot of money in the last couple of years working with Kevin King and Libby Dayton on edge of field studies. And we've also worked with our agency out of Texas to do the SEEP study to determine what best management practices need to be in place to reduce the amount of phosphorus and nitrogen leaving the farm. The number one thing that we need to do is we need to make sure we're soil testing. Even though soil testing's been around for years and we've been preaching it, we've still got a lot of acres across the state and across the nation that doesn't have current soil test. And when I talk about current soil test, I'm talking less than 4 years old. And our standard is a minimum. We like to see 25 acres or less on those soil samples. There's a lot of grid sampling going on in the Western Lake Erie Basin, and I think that needs to continue to grow so that we can further reduce the application of nutrients where they're not needed and place them where they're needed so we can get the most yield out of them. So in the research that Kevin King's done, how many of you have been at a presentation in the last 2 years where Kevin spoke talking about the edge of field? Okay. So in this next winter or this fall, as you're going to field days or maybe down to Ada to the Conservation Tillage Conference, I'd say I'm about 99% sure that Kevin King will probably be presenting down there. If you haven't heard Kevin speak, you need to get to one of his meetings. A lot of you, I don't know the average size of producers, but we do have a lot of retailers here. When we get soil test levels up and above the agronomic levels, a lot of Kevin's research is showing that we're losing more phosphorus through the tile system than what we need to be. So what we need to do is we need to start identifying things we can do to reduce that loss, and one of it is pull soil samples or soil test levels down. And I know that's a difficult sale because when I went to school, many of you in here are close to my age, we were taught that phosphorus didn't move. So with that philosophy, a lot of farmers in good years use the soil as a bank to reduce their income tax needs or liability. So if you could put on some extra phosphorus, it reduced our income tax, but we knew it was a safe place to put it as far as a bank. Once we put that phosphorus out there, unless we had erosion, it stayed. Well, unfortunately, what we're seeing in some of the newer research is that phosphorus is moving at some rates that are really surprising us. The majority of the time that the numbers are high are on very high levels of phosphorus, and I'm talking 100 parts per million, 150 parts per million. That's generally not been built up from commercial fertilizer alone. A lot of times that's related to livestock operations. The unfortunate thing is a lot of times when we have those high soil tests, we're still seeing the application of commercial phosphorus, even, some full rate, some just pop up. The majority of the research is showing us that we can raise a crop without that phosphorus. It may be much more related to the nitrogen. So as retailers in the room, as you're working with producers, I ask that you take a hard look at those soil samples and move away from applying phosphorus when it's above the agronomic rates listed in the tri-state. You can go to grid samples and make sure that they're applying them on the low acres and getting them off the high acres. The Western Lake Erie Basin problem is not going to go away. When we came into before late June and into the July, we had a fairly low prediction as far as the algae bloom. And from my standpoint, when I looked at where we were at in a phosphorus protection program, I thought we were pretty good because the majority of the phosphorus that was applied had been incorporated. We had a growing crop out there, and for the most part, I thought we were past the window of high rainfall. However, June came and July, and the rain started coming and the phosphorus started leaving. And we had one of the highest loadings in the Western Lake Erie Basin for phosphorus that we've had in the past. We've got a very significant algae bloom going on up there right now. And we're just going to have to continue to work to reduce the amount of phosphorus. The last I heard, the toxin level of the bloom was lower than predicted. And one of the estimated reasons for that is we've got a high bloom. However, the nitrogen levels are low enough that the algae's not converting and making toxin. They're still trying to figure that out to find if that's going to be a consistent thing, that if our nitrogen levels are low, it's not going to convert to toxin. So that's the other reason that, as we develop these nutrient management programs, we also need to focus on reducing the amount of nitrogen that's leaving the farm. And a lot of people ask me, what that Lake Erie, it's not just us. It's the municipalities. It's the golf courses, and it is all of us. It is the municipalities, it is the golf courses, and it is agriculture. The municipalities have been challenged, the golf courses have been challenged, the fertilizer manufacturers have been challenged, and all of them are trying to make strides to reduce the amount of phosphorus and nutrients leaving their own operations. And I challenge you as agriculture producers to do everything you can to reduce that. This past spring, the state of Ohio passed Senate Bill 1, which is going to affect the Western Lake Erie Basin. And I'm afraid that if we continue to have blooms like we did this year, there will be an increase in regulations. I can't say that that'll happen, but I will guess that will be a strong possibility. And currently, Senate Bill 1 just covers the Western Lake Erie Basin. However, some of you watched the news. We had blooms in the Ohio River this year. Grand Lake St. Mary's is still exhibiting a bloom. Several of our other private inland lakes are doing it. So if you're not in the Western Lake Erie Basin, you also need to step forward and make your best effort to reduce the reduction of nutrients leaving your farm. As far as other federal programs, or all federal programs, in the new farm bill that was passed, the amount of dollars spent towards conservation has been decreased. Ohio is going to continue to get funds because of the Western Lake Erie Basin, but I can tell you we do not handle enough money to solve this problem or give everybody a contract to implement all the best management practices. As retailers, when you're working with producers, be familiar with our programs and Steve's programs over at the Farm Service Agency. And you guys are seeing more of the ground than what we are. When you're out there grid sampling, you're looking at it on a 2.5 acre basis or on a management unit basis. Identify those blowholes. Identify those standpipes. Take a look at where the waterways are needed. Last year, I was working with a retailer. They lost a high buoy in a blowhole, cost them $40,000 in repair and 6 weeks of downtime during peak spraying season. So from your own business standpoint, getting those blowholes fixed, not spraying around those standpipes or getting those buffers around, converting those standpipes or Hickenbobs to French drains or surface inlets will continue to improve the lake. So you as retailers have an opportunity also to make a difference out there and hopefully prevent less regulation and laws being implemented. So with that, I'll stop and I'll take any questions.
What is NRCS's response to the fact that we have lakes in southeastern Ohio that have no agricultural runoff but have high alligator numbers?
I think, I know Burr Oak is one that you maybe talked about. You're right, it's mainly wooded areas. We believe it's probably related to failed septic systems in the watershed, which is, if you look at those, they've never had the whole lake problem that, say, a Grand Lake has had. Most of the bloom that I've seen has been like in the back of water and the harbors that get a lot of water moving through. So they are working on the septic systems in those areas. So like you said earlier, it's us, it's not one sector.
But it seems to me that those problems have been pushed to the back burner in the lake area issue. Agriculture has taken the brunt of the first wave of attack, maybe rightfully so, but I would sure like these other problems to be brought to the forefront sooner rather than later.
Well, I think if you look at what's going on last year, during the peak of the bloom, myself and several others, when we went to Chicago and met with EPA, and they have devoted an additional pot of money to the communities to improve sewage treatment plants. So they're working on that. In the past year, Ohio has passed a new home sewage system law to emphasize the repair and maintenance of home septic system. I think that's something that's still going on out there that needs to be worked on. And there's been millions of dollars put towards that. I know in our local community over in Fredericktown, water rates tripled because they put in a new sewage treatment plant. It's definitely a focus. If you go to these towns, the cost of addressing that. But agriculture with over 4 million acres in the watershed is still a big factor. And I don't want to be standing 10 years down the road when they've addressed everything and we haven't, and there's only one finger pointing at us. We've got an opportunity now to say we can fix this, instead of, if everybody else gets things in line, it's going to be, well, what are you going to do? So I agree, there's a lot of things out there. Some of them we don't understand, but I think there's some things that we can obviously do to improve things.
You might be the guy to complain to or not, I don't know, but I have a major problem with the EQIP program. I'm sure there's other producers in here that think the same boat as me, that if you're doing the right thing, like a lot of us raising wheat, got hay, filter strips, and rock shoots, and control structures and whatnot, already on the farm, we're doing grid sanding. I just quit applying. I get penalized because I'm doing the right thing and have been. My neighbor gets everything, I don't get nothing.
Yeah.
I think that problem's not been addressed at all that I've been complaining. I might get it, but.
Well, the one challenge with the Environmental Quality Incentive Program, and that program is developed for change or for taking the next step. And if you're taking the next step, we can do that. But we also rate or rank each operation to where we're getting the best bang for the buck from a government standpoint. And a lot of times, the government gets in trouble for not getting the most benefit out there. But we try to, when we spend the money, we try to get as much as possible. The Conservation Security Program was originally developed for the operators that had the most practices already implemented and moved them along. And I greatly appreciate the growers in the room that are planting a lot of wheat and planting a lot of hay, because that's not normal. Our program is probably to try to incentivize more people to move that way. We do in the EQIP program, we've got a payment to add small grain to the rotation. And I talked with our folks in the last month about when that's applicable. And maybe I'll be the one you'll be mad at. But when we look to change and make a difference, I told them, I said, if your farm is Mark Smith hay and straw farm, you probably don't need to be paying me an incentive to adopt planting hay or small grain, because I want that to go out to the Joe Corn and Bean to add hay or add small grain to the rotation, so that we can work on some of those problems I mentioned earlier. And the main reason I did that was because the thought behind the EQIP program is for the adoption of change and the adoption of new practice. If you're raising 1,000 or 300 acres of wheat, and you've got a farm over here that you haven't raised wheat on in the last 5 years, if you take 100 acres from over here and move it over here, and then Mark Smith gives you an incentive payment to do that, I really didn't gain anything, because now you're not planting that over here. If you're building your wheat acres, I can make that argument. But if you're just moving the same number of acres to a different place in your operation, from a taxpayer benefit, I'm not getting it. So that was some of the restrictions that was put on the EQIP program. The CSP program provides those payments for the operators that are doing more to add practices. And then we've also got the CRP program for continuous practices. Any other questions? And I'll be around if you want to talk to me.
Has there ever been anything done about, or any research in any way about the simple fact that, well, we're having these algae blooms, and at the same time we're having an increased algae blooms in our ponds? We service about 100 ponds, and from 2013 to 14, we doubled our Cure-Tree Plus copper sulfate products for controlling algae, and we've third them up again this year. So there seems to be some kind of correlation between algae blooms in Lake Erie, algae blooms in our pond. Is what's causing that the same factor, or what?
Well, they just, I forget, I can't remember if it was EPA or it was a private sector, just put up $10 million to try to help figure that out. That's the elephant in the room. As a kid, I swam in a lot of ponds, and I lived.
We've done an
But-
excellent job of staying away from putting phosphates around these ponds and these kind of things. So we feel as though we're not washing phosphate in these ponds as far as fertilizing the lawns. We use O-grade. And we started doing that 3 or 4 years ago. So we're just confused why this correlation is the same.
Well, if you look worldwide, the increase in cyanobacteria algae is huge. And right now, we can't put our finger on what happened. If you look at in the early 90s, how clean Lake Erie was, after the 70s, but starting in the early to mid 90s, the amount of DRP or dissolved reactive phosphorus that was coming down the Maumee and entering into the Western Lake Erie Basin just took off like that. And why is that? When you look at a lot of the extension data on soil test, and we've actually been reducing rates and reducing soil test levels, but that number continues to climb.
Are some of the products that we're using to keep phosphate more available causing this problem?
For the most part, the phosphorus products have stayed relatively same. There's some enhancement products out there today that increases availability and stuff. Get a little bit nervous about that could continue to exacerbate their problem. But nobody has been able to put a solid finger on the cause. And there's a lot of research money being put into that. And you could be a very rich man if you could tell us, because if we can reduce that. But the long term is we've got to implement as many best management practices as possible. So thank you very much.